This project is a bit of an experiment for me, so I thought I'd experiment with stop motion while I was at it. If nothing else, it gives me more of an appreciation for Frank Howarth's stop motion videos. Even if you aren't interested in woodwork, Frank tells stories through his woodworking and cinematic stop motion. They're really quite interesting videos. I'm always nervous about turning videos, as I haven't turned many bowls, and the process is as much technique as it is art. So I'm sure I'm doing more than one or two things wrong. Thankfully the stop motion kind of blurs out what I might be doing wrong. This bowl is out of Jarrah. If you've not worked with Jarrah before, it's a pain. This particular piece is particularly dry. It's very hard and blunts tools abnormally fast. I think it's something about the silica count in the Jarrah. At least, if nothing else, it's been good for sharpening practice. Just like with the crushed stone, it's a matter of filling the cavity with nerds and then gluing it down with CA. I tried to use a metal rule as a grater to try and remove the larger nerds. Unlike the crushed stone, this won't be sanded flat and won't have all the gaps filled with smaller and smaller grits, as I'd have to sort those by hand, and that's a lot of nerds. And I can't really sand it flat because, unlike the stones, the colour doesn't extend all the way through the candy. Just the outer shell is the colour and canubra wax. This was a disaster. This is the first time I've used epoxy for anything other than gluing, and it was awful. Unfortunately, it was entirely my fault. I didn't read the directions properly and applied the epoxy while it was about 5 degrees Celsius too cold. It needs to be about 20 degrees, it was about 15. Otherwise the epoxy gets quite thick, and as you can see, it just does not flow properly. After it hardened, I took it back to the lathe and scraped that off fairly easily with a round nose scraper, and I didn't record that. After scraping off most of the epoxy except for on the rim, I had to resand the entire bowl, and I went up to 600 grit. Then on the rim I chose to wet sand with micro mesh to make the epoxy really shine. I find with plastics or acrylics, CA, whatever, the micro mesh does a really good job of getting out scratches you wouldn't normally notice on wood. I then applied some U-Butte Triple E Ultra Shine, which is a wax suspended cutting compound. This really brings out quite the sheen in timber, let alone on plastics. If you're doing an acrylic pen, you can use that as your final coat, and if you've sanded throughout your grits first, it apparently will get up to about the equivalent of 30,000 grit, which is pretty fine. I then applied U-Butte's Shallow Wax, which is a friction polish, which is basically shellac and wax mixed together. I did 2 coats of that, and it really brings out the colour in the Jarrah. So despite the epoxy mess that I made, which was just horrible, this turned out pretty well. There's a few problems where there are bubbles in the epoxy which have either popped after it's set from sanding it back, or is still embedded in there. It has polished up pretty well. The micro mesh does a pretty good job, and the Triple E Ultra Shine acts as a really nice cutting compound on plastics like epoxy or acrylic. So if you're doing an acrylic pen, it's a fantastic final material to use on them. Unfortunately, my cold jaws for reversing the plate, bowl, whatever, aren't big enough for this diameter. So unfortunately at the moment I can't actually finish off the bottom side. What I'll do over probably the next week or two is make up a Longworth chuck so that I can get a much larger chuck for reversing bowls and finishing off the back side of them. So for now this is done. It'll go on the back burner, and hopefully I'll get final pictures once it's all done, but that might be a month or two away. Thanks for watching.